Hello, welcome to our webinar on sustainability indicators. My name is Nat Springer. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Agricultural Sustainability Institute at UC Davis. And I'm here with Patrick Huber, who's a project scientist with the Information Center for the Environment. So our goal for this talk is to provide you with a bit more depth into the concept of indicators and how they fit into our project, the sustainable sourcing of global agricultural raw materials. So our use of indicators was briefly discussed in the project overview webinar, but hopefully here we can provide you with some additional context. So one thing we hope you took away from our project overview webinar is a grasp on what we mean when we discuss issues, particularly this list you see here of 44 sustainability issues, which we derived using various sustainability assessments, corporate communications, and studies on sustainable livelihoods. So these are all important issues. And a big part of your stakeholder contribution will be to help us fine-tune and prioritize this list. Yet even with such priorities, the obvious next step is to ask, well, what is the current state of this particular issue? Or how can we tell we are making progress towards reducing, say, our impacts or the vulnerability of our supply chain for this issue? So this is where indicators come in. So what exactly is an indicator? The definition we use for this project is from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which uses indicators in its own projects to build its MEA goals. So you can, so this definition is that indicators are a metric of some sort, metrics that can be compared and contrasted or some way, as a tool to understand the systems behind each issue. So in this way, indicators can help us measure the important characteristics of each individual issue. But maybe even more importantly, they can help us build relationships between issues so that a single indicator may be used to measure 2, 3, or even 4 issues simultaneously. But before we get into too much detail about indicators, let's look at some examples. So here are a number of different indicators of poverty from 3 different global assessments. Each global assessment has a different flavor to it, and you can see that this is reflected in the indicators they chose. For instance, the Millennium Development Goals focus on national poverty indicators, whereas the IAASTD identifies more with the farmers or livelihoods perspective. Yet regardless of the focus, you can see that each indicator is useful at measuring at least some component of the poverty issue, whether this be the current population in poverty, potential drivers of poverty, such as employment or farmer access to markets, or measures of progress for combating poverty, such as access to microcredit. You can also see how an indicator like undernutrition and overnutrition can cross over to other issues as well, such as nutritional status, for instance. So these examples already show the benefits of using indicators as information to look at each issue and the relationships between related issues. But this isn't the only reason that we have decided to use them as a component in this project. So there already exists a large number of efforts to identify important sustainability indicators. And the scientific platform that this project is creating is perfect for bringing together this large body of work into a database. So I will talk about this database in more detail shortly, and Patrick will talk later in this webinar about the scientific platform. But once this information is in place, we will be able to use these tools along with the unique expertise here at ASI ICE and in this project, such as our TAC, and ultimately you, the stakeholders, to identify the information gaps, or where there is a lack of indicators or data for a particular issue. So, and finally, we want to be able to pick out those indicators and relate to strategies for achieving more sustainable supply chains. So in addition to helping provide information about these issues, indicators can also help connect the issues to strategies. So now we've talked about the what and also the why behind indicators. I want to talk about the how. As I mentioned, a large body of work already exists that provides important sustainability indicators. So we've done a lot of work identifying such sources and have pulled out the indicators from these sources to build an indicator database. So right now I briefly want to talk about how we've done this specifically and give you an idea of what's in this database. So we've been able to cast our net very widely and take sustainability indicators from a number of sources. Our first step was to take any indicators and find any indicators that existed in the global initiative studies, the same studies that were used to help us construct our issue list, which provided us a very good base set of indicators in our database. Now, we've since added indicators from various commodity-specific studies, particularly rice, as well as a number of existing indicator databases, as you can see here. The bullet points are just a subset of the sources that make up this database and are here just to provide you with a few examples. So this process populated our database with over 2,000 indicators. And as we entered each indicator into this database, we made sure to capture some of their basic characteristics. The most basic being the issues, again, that each indicator is associated with. Or in other words, whether it provides information on air and climate, poverty, public health, et cetera, et cetera. This will be a useful tool not only for this project, but for anyone who is looking to identify indicators for specific issues and frameworks. We're also moving towards a database format that will not only just list indicator characteristics, like you would see in an Excel spreadsheet, for instance, but will also track the relationships between indicators and other such fields. So using a database that tracks these relationships is called a semantic web, or that's how we're defining it. And Patrick will talk about this a bit later in the webinar. But I just wanted to mention this capability now because it greatly enhances the usefulness and outside visibility of this database that we're working on. So if we look back to the indicator examples I showed you before, you can see that these same indicators are now part of our indicator database, with each number specifying a unique entry in the database. The indicators were actually taken from a global assessment published by each of these three organizations. So now this slide you may recognize from the other general overview webinar. And hopefully here this slide is beginning to make a bit more sense. What I just finished talking about were the first two boxes here, which identify potential indicators and then associating them with the issue list, which I showed at the very beginning of this presentation. But these two steps only provide us with a database full of indicators. So the next challenging steps, beyond this preliminary identification stage, is to organize these indicators and somehow pluck out a smaller set of indicators that can provide us the information necessary to address the important or core issues. So these steps that are to come make up the final four boxes in this figure. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick from here to describe, so he can describe this process of moving from our large database to a smaller set that is credible, useful, and legitimate.
In the previous section of the webinar, Matt described the indicator database that the team has been creating. In this section, I will be describing a process leading to an indicator classification scheme or typology, followed by an assessment process for these indicators within the structure of that typology. The process described here is meant to represent a conceptual flow of the typology and assessment process. Specific project timelines and the sequence of tasks within a project will be determined by questions being posed and products delivered. For example, our work with Mars Corporation on sustainable sourcing may result in a different indicator assessment process than that required for another project using the same indicators. However, the conceptual flow should remain consistent regardless of the context of the project. As you heard earlier in the webinar, we've already collected approximately 2,000 indicators from a variety of sources. In order to develop a tractable set of indicators for use in a specific project, these need to be categorized and assessed to determine which are the most appropriate for use in a given context. To accomplish this, we are developing an indicator typology. This typology will be a classification scheme that sorts indicators by potential use within a given conceptual framework. Multiple frameworks and uses may require different indicators. The value of a particular indicator may be influenced by its expected use. Therefore, an assessment process should be utilized within each type category to score or rank indicators for that specific use. This slide, which you saw earlier in the webinar, shows the three-step process we are using in our indicator work to move from indicator identification to assessment. Nat described the process by which indicators are identified from numerous sources and associated with appropriate sustainability issues. Once a set of indicators has been identified, they're sorted by conceptual framework and use or application. Currently, we are using two conceptual frameworks in this project: impacts to global systems and vulnerability of commodity supply chains. This sorting is the typology component of the process. Finally, indicators are assessed within the context of their type category. Some may be filtered out as unsuitable for use in this project. Remaining indicators will be assessed using a number of criteria found in the existing literature on sustainability. The following slides will explore the typology and assessment in a bit more detail. This table shows a potential classification matrix for an indicator typology. The rows represent conceptual frameworks that we are using in this project. Columns represent possible uses for indicators. Within each matrix cell are potentially a number of indicators. In this slide, we've provided an example typology using the issue of climate change under an impacts mitigation conceptual framework. Some indicators can provide an assessment of baseline conditions of natural or human systems. For climate change, this could be global mean temperature. Others will provide information on trends within these systems. Again, global mean temperature could be used in this context. Some indicators will be associated with a warning signal for an approaching threshold. In this example, the extent of polar ice could be one such indicator. Some indicators will measure threats or the drivers of change in a system. Greenhouse gas emissions could play this role in this example. Ideally, strategies will be developed to reduce impacts to natural or human systems, and indicators can be used to measure the success of these strategies. In this example, measuring emissions reductions could play that role. Finally, some indicators can be used to assess the process of strategy development, such as measuring the legitimacy of the process as seen by multiple stakeholders. This flowchart maps out the conceptual process of assessing the potential use of indicators within the type classification from the previous slide. The first part of the assessment process uses filter criteria to eliminate indicators that do not meet basic thresholds of credibility. Indicators that pass the filter criteria are then evaluated using the assessment criteria. There are many potential assessment criteria. Indicators selected for ultimate use should meet at least some of the assessment criteria. There are two types of filter criteria, those that are context-dependent and those that are independent of a particular research question. In our assessment process, useful scale is one of the former type. Useful spatial scale will be determined by the context of the research program. Indicators that do not meet this criterion will not provide information at a scale that is useful to the project and should be eliminated. Two criteria in our process can be assessed independent of context: measurability and scientific soundness. Meeting these filter criteria will lend credibility to the indicators that pass on to the assessment process. The second part of the indicator selection process is the assessment of the indicators that pass the filter criteria. Many independent criteria can be found in the sustainability literature. Those found on this slide represent a large sample of these. A subset of the many assessment criteria will help determine the usefulness of a particular indicator. For example, indicators that are simple and easy to use may prove to be the most useful. Other criteria will be used to assess the legitimacy that indicators may have to a group of stakeholders in a sustainability assessment process. This set of criteria overlaps those that speak to the usefulness of specific indicators. An example of a criterion used to assess the legitimacy of an indicator is that indicator a widely accepted method of measuring some aspect of a given sustainability issue? Finally, some criteria will be used to assess both usefulness and legitimacy, such as, is an indicator relevant to making policy decisions? While the research team can make preliminary assessments of indicators, users and other stakeholders are indispensable in the assessment process. Their width and depth of knowledge are crucial. A completed assessment process, using both filtering and assessment criteria, should lead to a ranked set of indicators within typology categories. This will provide valuable information for the process of selecting indicators to use in a sustainability assessment project. The typing and assessing of indicators outlined in the previous section provides a number of benefits to this ASI ICE project. First, it provides a means of critically assessing a plethora of potential indicators. This then helps hone down a large list into a manageable subset of the most salient indicators for our project. Finally, it provides a conceptual template for future projects requiring indicator assessment. The last section of this webinar will focus on a tool that we are developing to help in the management of the indicator process, a semantic web. A semantic web uses what is called a graph database to focus on relationships between many data sets and data types. It can use a controlled vocabulary to both organize data within our project and link to other projects and data outside the scope of our project. A semantic web can be useful for organizing large amounts of data, for example, our indicator database. However, it goes a step further and provides a means of identifying novel linkages between indicators, issues, and data that can facilitate the typology and assessment process. These various data types can be associated in multiple non-hierarchical ways to potentially achieve unique perspectives on sustainability issues. Finally, the use of a controlled vocabulary can link our work to a larger realm of digital knowledge. This slide provides a schematic view of how a semantic web links data within our project. We have lots of networked information, and this tool is important in helping us use this information. It is an internal aid in understanding our data and provides access to global information resources as well as contributes to them. AgriVoc is a project developed by the FAO to catalog global agricultural information using a controlled vocabulary. By using the same vocabulary, our project will fit into this linked and growing web of global information. Our semantic web, then, is an open access, machine-readable, and outward-facing component of our project.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I think that description really connects the indicator work and the database work really well. So before we sign off, I really just want to sum up the webinar by reiterating the main project benefits of this work on indicators. So really the main benefit of using indicators is a straightforward and clear way of providing information on sustainability, both in the context of the issues as well as the frameworks. So this process Patrick just presented can be applied to any type of project that wishes to use indicators in this way. The database and semantic web will make them accessible to the general public, and ultimately it will be useful to show the issues for which indicators are lacking. And finally, as Patrick just mentioned, the semantic web will help show the very unique relationships or linkages that would otherwise not be very visible. So that's all we have for now on indicators. Thanks for your attention. Hopefully this webinar has provided you with a good foundation for understanding how our team is using indicators and the semantic web throughout our project. For those of you attending the stakeholder meetings, we look forward to your feedback and further insight. Thanks.